Good afternoon. Thanks for attending. It's really great to be here today. I hope you've had a great conference so far. I'm honored to be speaking today, and I briefly want to talk a little bit about what we're going to discuss. I'm not going to be showing code or any cool builder things. This is really kind of going to be focused on what we see happening with 5G in the future. And this is a great time to be talking about it, and this is a great spot to talk about this because 5G is really going to be felt by consumers in the form of an audience, right? And if you're in the media industry, this is really one of those changes that comes along every so often that can completely transform how audiences think of technology. So the first question that I got from the media leadership was, why is 5G different? Here's the exciting news. It's really not, right? What it is an evolution. It's a valid question, but we have to be honest. It's not something that's like the greatest thing since sliced bread, but it will enable quite a few things to happen for a consumer and for us as producers or distributors of content that I don't think people fully understand. And those evolutions, you know, they're not always equal. Every evolution is not equal in terms of the impact that a consumer or an audience member sees. So we see it as an end-to-end transformation of technology and economics. The network is going to change at the access layer, and what that means for those of us who aren't telco geeks is essentially like how we interface to the network to get the content that we want and get the content we love. That's going to change. And it brings about two technology components that are really important. And these are concepts that I think we generally understand the value of, which is virtualization and mobile edge computing. And together those things bring quite a bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about them. But higher speeds plus lower latency plus mobile edge computing kind of enable these new services. And eventually it's going to take some time for 5G to find its way into consumers. Some of the most popular phones aren't going to be widely available for a few years. But as it kind of waves its way in that evolutionary fashion, it's going to enable new business models and new applications and new usages that we haven't seen. And that's a good thing. Bezos has a comment, and this is from his 2016 letter to shareholders. And the highlight here, customers are always beautifully, wonderfully dissatisfied. And we know that this is true. And we know that evolutions kind of reset your expectations. Think about it this way. How many of you are happy with your airplane's Wi-Fi? Right? We complain about Wi-Fi at 30,000 feet. But we complain about it because LTE came along and it really kind of reset our expectations of what a minimum standard for connectivity and streaming should be. And this happens every so often. For those of you or me who are old enough to remember the first cell phone, it's a really kind of liberating experience. I mean, I didn't have a battery pack carrying it around, but it was pretty cool. And then you sent your first text or your first picture, right? That experience really kind of changed the way you thought about the device. And then came a keyboard, right? And you were typing like this. Your thumbs would get cramped up, but it was still really cool. And then came high-resolution screens. And high-resolution screens were great and made even better when all of a sudden I didn't need to be at my home or at my office for a Wi-Fi connection to get the content I needed, whether it was for work or whether it was for waiting on a plane and downloading my latest episode or catching up on cat videos. All of those things have created a treadmill, in essence, right? A treadmill of constantly raised expectations from consumers. And the first companies that arrive and deliver on that new capability are the ones that set the bar. We talk about bar raising a lot at Amazon. That's what happens, right? Somebody comes in and raises the bar for consumer expectations, and we have to respond. So let's talk briefly about the core elements of the technology that 5G enables. And again, these are transformations. They're not revolutions. They're just evolutions that are enabling transformations. The first is ultra-low latency and higher bandwidth. For those, this is a business section, so I don't know how technical the audience is, but we can briefly talk about it in two ways. Lower latency is the speed limit on a highway, and bandwidth is the number of lanes on that freeway, which driving up here, I can say we need more of. But that being said, When you combine those things and you put them with, say, Moore's Law, which is really nothing more than a law of conviction and investment to improve computing capabilities, you enable mobile edge computing. And so what you're getting is 10x faster capabilities than you have today and 10x wider pipes, right? So you can do a lot with that. But you can only do so much with the network. You have to have that the computing capability at the endpoint, as close as the consumer can get it to do things like render 4K videos. Mobile edge computing brings those capabilities very close. And ultimately, you then have virtualized networks and network slicing. And that enables media distributors to essentially create private networks, if you wanted, or private lanes for getting your content and getting paid for it in a different way. It really disaggregates and disambiguates a lot of the people in the middle. And we know what happens when those types of business models come about. But it's not just the device. 5G is going to be turned on and enabled in a whole host of things that actually change even the very definition of media and how we interact with it. All the way from thinking about city governments, right? They have to produce content about how to keep people safe in disasters or whatever the case may be. Smart cities, smart homes, all these things are going to have a 5G element to it, and content is going to be created there. And that creates new channels, new elements, but there's also an equipment piece. If you're in production, think about how this is going to change in terms of what your creatives are going to be able to do when they're untethered, when they're unleashed. When you untether something, creativity abounds, and we know this. And we've seen what happens when these types of things are enabled. The net result is that old business models stagnate and decline while challengers emerge. And when those challengers come in, if they win the game of your viewers' and audience's attention, disruption has uneven consequences, right? As we think about this next transformation, everyone in this room, including our managers, our boards, our bosses, our audiences, we have to rethink about how we produce content, how we distribute and monetize it, and how we gather and act on user data, right? It's going to really enable us to rethink things again, and we have to rethink that today. Why? Because nobody is satisfied with the status quo. Nobody likes their Wi-Fi right now at 30,000 feet. So then the next question was, well, hey, Dee, how big is 5G going to be in M&E? And what does 5G really do from a business perspective? That wonderful dissatisfaction is what creates these business opportunities. And the truth is, if I were to stand up here and say, I know definitively what that market size is, who knows? I'm wrong, right? But I think being directionally correct is the most important thing. And we found a study that actually was really sophisticated, and if anybody wants to get it, you can Google Ovum Research, but it's big. It's hundreds of billions of dollars big. They actually have a really great methodology, Ovum Research, about how to think about what the impact on revenue will be because of 5G. In other words, with 5G, it adds $765 billion of new revenue opportunity for us. This is important stuff. We've got to work together to figure out how you capitalize on that. That's almost $1 trillion in a decade. For a point of reference, about 225 billion of it is in China, right? Of new revenue in China because of their very advanced path on 5G. They're being very aggressive over there. That business opportunity, that 765 billion, basically breaks out across these general buckets, right? Mobile transformation. That is basically how people today consume media on their cell phones, right? And when you think about it, that's about 420 billion of that 765. Why? Well, that's because the average monthly traffic per wireless subscriber around 2028, and this figure is staggering, will be about 85 gigabytes of data. Think about what your data cap is today from your carriers. It ain't 85 gigs, right? It's a lot lower. video and content and media of a video type will be over 90% of that traffic. And a lot of that is going to be in new media interactions. Now, new media interactions can be defined as anything from simple things like when you see now a Spotify song and kind of the video overlay that's behind it, right? That's a simple one that we understand the evolution of music streaming today by combining that video element. It's going to change a lot more when you have the network capabilities and the computing capabilities to enable AR/VR. And AR/VR advertising is going to be a huge beneficiary, about $150 billion of capital there, of revenue to go take. And that is actually probably one of the most interesting spaces, and I'm going to talk a lot more about why I think AR/VR is going to be so important and why I actually think all of us in this room need to be contemplating what our customer base looks like. And then, of course, we ultimately think that gaming services transform and haptic experiences. What do we mean by haptic experiences? Touch, feel. Anybody who's seen Ready Player One? Anybody seen that? That's what we're talking about. That's not that far away. We have a lot of debates inside of our team that a colleague of mine, Brendan, who's here today, we talk about this. What happens when you can, I don't know, charge for feeling the punch, right? There's an entirely new business model that's going to come about. Some industries will move faster than others, obviously in the media industry, to take advantage of this. That enables these transformational impacts across the industry. So what do we mean by across the industry? Well, if you're going to try to figure out how to participate in what 5G unlocks, you've got to go now. And you have to experiment. And those experimentations are going to come in lots of different formats. And the key is not that you have first mover advantage, but rather to understand what's going to be achievable and what's not. It's that slide that Jake just talked about, right? The ability to experiment and fail. We're going to talk about why and how you can enable that today. Because, by the way, LA is the marquee market for the cellular companies to deploy 5G, right? So first, and I think it's important to remember that the reason it's such a marquee market is because the content owners largely are here. They're in this market, right? And if we think about short-term, medium-term, and long-term of what 5G is doing, and that includes 5G today, right? And 5G, let's define short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Short-term is basically between now and, say, 2020. Medium-term is 2020 to 2023. And long-term is 2024 and beyond, right? And when you think about it, the first thing is that mobile-first video business models are going to be enabled. And they're right around the corner. Some companies to watch in this space are companies like Hatch, right? Really think about what they can do with 5G. Medium-term interactive content, basically gamification, if you will, of plot lines. That's going to happen, we think. And it's going to happen maybe in smaller formats, not the mega productions, but I do expect this to come about. And then long-term, we think about volumetric 3D video. And as a sports fan, I would love a second screen experience that gives me all the telemetry data of a play, of every player in my fantasy league for football. That's going to happen, right? It's going to. Or for those of us who are daily sports fantasy players on gambling platforms, imagine in-action betting, right? That's a big, big market. Which brings me to actually, and again, this is all enabled because of mobile edge computing and how you can take advantage of those capabilities at the edge with really fast networks and really wide pipes. Gaming, I think that this is probably the easiest one for us to understand what's going to happen. Short term, it's going to widen the market. It's going to create a much larger TAM. And I think that medium term, it's really going to change how we think about virtual items in the virtual marketplace. We saw a big cryptocurrency announcement today, right? With a lot of players involved. Think about how 5G and the network capacity is teamed up with the right elements of computational capability could change what you're selling in the virtual market spot, right? And again, some industries will pick this up faster than others inside of the media and entertainment spaces. And then long term, we think that there is going to be a mass audience move towards lagless gaming streaming services. Think about this as a Netflix for gaming. Gamers aren't tied to their platform, they're tied to their content, right? So it's very possible that if you could disaggregate the platform channel, the phone, the particular brand, the particular platform, and go straight to the consumers, imagine what that does for distributors and gaming companies like an Activision or an Epic, who are both customers very successful on AWS. And then AR/VR. AR/VR right now has two problems: a technical problem and a capital problem. It's very hard to go out to a venture capitalist and say, hey, I got this really great AR/VR space. It's going to take over the world, because it can't. The market it requires a lot of advancements to catch up before they can do it, right? But when you think about AR/VR production and you think about brands, every brand is going to want to think about how to produce AR/VR content. And that's going to create new users. And what happens is when you create a new market and you create a new answer to that market, more money flows in, more pitchmen come out, more capabilities, more capital flows in, more users are created, and it's this virtuous cycle of investment, capacity, capability, consumption, and so on, right? That's what untethering means with 5G plus mobile edge cloud. So to win in the transition, you have to be able to innovate. And Jake talked a little bit about this prior. This is a transition you don't want to ignore, because if you do, you're ignoring it at your peril. To win in transition, you basically have to focus on these four things, because if we don't, you're either going to be the disruptor or the disrupted, and we really do believe that. Generally, our customers tell us that there's a combination of forces that kind of prevent companies, any company, but particularly in media and entertainment where it's capital intensive, from going faster. The number one reason is kind of just focus. Number two is organization and processes, and those combine because they're big financial elements. If you're wrong, if you bet incorrectly, there's a lot of lost money on the table, right? So let's talk about each one of these. First, let's focus on how you get your tech talent working on not low-value activities. And it starts by asking yourself this question: what business are you in? Are you in the business of content production, or are you in the business of system administration? Right? Fundamentally. Once you know that answer, you then have to figure out, okay, how do I focus this talent and the resources that work for us in making the money? How do we use them to differentiate our content in the eyes of our audiences? This is an example of a company that went cloud first, disrupted a lot of people in the business and in the industry, and this is their revenue per employee. It's more than Apple. $2.1 million per employee. That's the importance of tying talent back to strategic content-generating activities. Netflix has a blog about how they did this. It's an older blog. It's from 2016. But it talked a little bit about what their ambition was. And their ambition, when I read it, I was like, wow. They wanted to become the first truly direct-to-consumer global TV network. And when I thought about that, I was kind of taken aback at what it would take to do that. That's a completely different hiring profile and talent pool than what they would have had to begin with. And that blog touches on several really fascinating topics, but one of them is how cloud enables scale, and how that scale allowed them to transition resources and money and people on every level to being free to invent and free to create. And that was something that was really important. To do that, though, it wasn't easy. They had to skill up, by training, and that was a thing that somebody had asked earlier, right? Or they just had to go find new talent. So we have to be prepared to go hunt in new spots for talent. The next is organization, and that's really about, are you constrained by physical locations? When you think about these questions that you need to answer, is that talent, is the right talent in the right space, or is it just kind of proximate talent and you're settling for next best alternative, right? Are you optimizing for collaboration and security, and is time wasted waiting on resources to free up on premises? And this happens in your value chain end to end. It's about understanding resources and physical locations of your own people, but also your vendor community. The vendor community from filming through visual production to editing to post-prod, all of that stuff has a proximate element to it. And if you can knock down those barriers, you should be able to think about how you take that talent and empower them to move faster, better. We have a global view of our audience. We need a global view of our talent so that we know how to put the best people on the best projects. Think about how you need to better collaborate internally and externally with your vendors and how you can move assets across the globe faster in the entire life cycle of content creation. This is a quote that I thought was really interesting. How do you produce more content faster? Well, you can't really spin up more artists on demand. And you can't just find talent on demand. But what you can do is you can start to use time as a commodity and a valuable resource more efficiently. Artists are the most valuable resource you have for creative houses. And with cloud capacity, time can become a commodity that you start to have a little bit of control over. And where this comes together in the physical world is an example that we had with Fox. When you thought about when, the World Cup in Russia, think about what they would have to do traditionally in a non-cloud environment with teams of production in Russia, in LA, all to make sure that they're getting the right content out. And by moving to the cloud, they were able to save millions of dollars in terms of how they function and deliver a better experience. The next one is about your product development. And product development isn't just the content element, it's about the direct-to-consumer components that you're going to need to be engaging in as well. Are your releases keeping up with audience expectations? Can you quickly pivot? And how quickly can you understand and act on data? Here's a real-time example of that. Sonic the Hedgehog had to be redone because Sony got backlash on Twitter from, hey, this does not look like the character I grew up with. And they had to redo the entire film, right? That's a pretty big gamble that they're now going to have to go back and do. But that's what we mean when we say you need to figure out how to architect agility. And architecting for agility is really about rapid prototyping. And rapid prototyping is fundamentally what the cloud enables you to do. We talk a lot about agility. This is an example. So it starts with kind of understanding a simple analogy of what a product development cycle looks like. And we can take a look at a traditional non-media way. Let's say you want to build a toy, right? Looks familiar to those from Disney, I'm sure. And that toy, traditionally, you have to design a prototype. You go from carving a model, you make some molds, you produce those injection molded parts, you assemble them somewhere, you get it back, and then you sell the finished toy. This is a lot of steps, right? In a rapid prototyping element, you kind of have a big bag of blocks, right? And we think of that in technology as microservices. And in the cloud, we think of it as microservices. And microservices are your big bag of blocks for your product teams to use to build. And then the business requirements are essentially the instructions, right? What market are you going after? What user? What channel? What device? Thinking about it from that perspective. And then within a short amount of time, hours, days, weeks, but not months or years, you produce a finished product. It's a finished toy. Looks generally, they're able to stand up a proof of concept or a minimum viable product. And sure, it lacks fine detail, and it's recognizable. It's not exactly what was asked for, but it's easy to modify and extend. So you build some new parts, and you say, hey, I need to put it on the back. It needs the Millennium Falcon needs a tail on the back. Great. So what you do then is you have to make some trade-offs, and then you take a group of Lego bricks, so you form a new custom brick, and you insert it in the top, and you have a more specialized common component. As you get this feedback loop, you can start to refine what parts need to change. You don't have to build your entire code base over. You don't have to build your entire infrastructure, and you don't have to build towards the edge case that you may not be getting. And that's the difference between traditional development and rapid development. Building blocks assembly, moving from months of work to hours, from custom to standard, or standard within your own shop, right? Too many detailed choices, need to adjust requirements, long decision cycles, and constraints. And the easiest way to think about this is, don't debate when you can experiment. Don't think that you have to have every answer. Just get something out there, take the feedback, change it. This is how Comcast looked at Xfinity X1. And what was most interesting about this is that, sure, on the feature side, if you're a developer at Comcast, you're able to take this very audience-centric environment and you're able to create features several times a week instead of once every 12 to 18 months on a traditional code freeze. Well, that basic capability allowed them to monetize this in a whole new way. Cox Communications white labels this for their service, right? So they're literally white labeling a competitor's capability, and they've got a new business line to go after. So that innovation will unlock new monetization pathways that you may not have today. Court Vision is another example. The Clippers, anybody who's been to a Clippers game that's used this, working with Second Spectrum, the Clippers built Court Vision very, very quickly. And the point of the quote makes it easy to build innovative products and get products quickly to market, because that's what audiences expect, right? Those are the things that they're demanding. And really, if you can do this successfully, you're minimizing the chance that your CFO is designing your products. And that's important, right? CFOs are great at what they do, but they're not really great at designing products. You have to get them comfortable with that, you kind of have to really think about how you empower, and if successful, how quickly you can scale, so that you know that it's not out of the budget to get it going. And if unsuccessful, does it have a bottom line impact? And really, it's limiting the blast radius if something goes wrong. And how do you scale what works while minimizing the cost of failure? Well, this is a quote from our CEO, Andy Jassy, and I love this quote. It requires two things. Inventure requires two things: the ability to try a lot of experiments, and not having to live with the collateral damage of failed experiments. That is big. It's not easy to accept that 9 out of 10 things are going to fail. And it's core to how we think about building our products and how we think about serving our customers. And again, it goes back to the idea, twofold, of one, being able to test and get to market quickly, and minimizing the blast radius if things go wrong. This is a quote from Live Nation. It may actually be from the previous speaker. I don't really know, to be honest. But it does talk about the ability to quickly deprovision and say yes to try new things, right? And reinvent, constant reinvention, constant treadmill of expectation management, being able to meet that. And then just to end this, how does this all come together? If you're a company that has already taken this journey and you think about what 5G does, there's probably no better example right now than what the NFL is doing with another customer of ours, Verizon, in their 5G networks. This is really cool. They've got a NFL mobile gaming challenge where they're asking developers to build things that take advantage of the 5G capability that they're unlocking and unleashing, and we'll be announcing at the Super Bowl who the winner is. I can't wait to see what the developer community is going to do with a 5G-enabled game. I mean, I can think of lots of things I would do, but I'm not going to be able to get it to market. So in conclusion, I just want to say that this isn't about focusing on the technology stack so much as it is about focusing on the business processes to take advantage of that nearly $1 trillion capability that's going to be enabled by a 5G evolution, right? It's about thinking through your business strategy, focusing your talent on the work that differentiates you in the eyes of your audience, and then figuring out how to empower your frontline creative teams to really move quickly. And creative teams, that's not just in content production, that's in tech and product production as well. Netflix, Comcast, Live Nation, NFL, others are following this path, and we would like to talk to you about following that path with you. So let's go build an amazing new audience capability with 5G when it's available. Thank you very much. Have a good day.